Okay, so in this video, we're going to talk about 30, 60, 90 special right triangles. This is going in on page 59 in your notebook. So 30 degree, 60 degree, 90 degree right triangles have a different pattern than 45, 45, 90. In these right triangles, each side is different because the two angles are not the same anymore. So the hypotenuse is 2 times the length of the short leg. So that means the hypotenuse we'll think of as 2x because we're going to call the short leg x. And then the long leg is the square root of 3 times the length of the short leg. So the sides are in the ratio of, sorry, I didn't pull that in, 1 to 1 root 3 to 2. Sorry, 1 second. The ratio is 1 to 1 root 3 to 2. So if I were to multiply that ratio by any number, that would give me a set of sides that would create a 30, 60, 90 degree right triangle. So just like we did with the 45, 45, 90, we're going to use that table with the angle measures and then our formula to solve. So the short leg is the leg that's across from the 30 degree angle. So that's why this is labeled here like that, right? So the short leg is x. The long leg is x times radical 3. And the hypotenuse is 2 times x. And so that pattern is what we're going to use to fill out the table for a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. And then we'll look at triangles and create a table to solve them. So again, the formula is embedded in the table that we're using, so we have it there, and that's always a good strategy so that you can find the appropriate values. So if for this one, x is 6, x radical 3, we're starting easy, is 6 radical 3 then, and 2 times x, if x is 6, 2 times 6 is 12. So 6, 6 root 3, and 12 would form a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. They're giving us 8 radical 3 as x radical 3. So looking at that, that means 8 must be x. So that means that our side for x is 8. And then 2 times 8 is 16. So that means that the hypotenuse is 16. For this next one, we've got the hypotenuse. So if the hypotenuse is 14, that's double the short leg. So if I divide 14 by 2, that gives me 7. So that means x must be 7, which means that the longer leg must be 7 times the square root of 3. This last one in this section is one of the uglier ones just because the hypotenuse is an odd number, and so that means that we're going to have a fraction. Because half of 25 is 12 and a half, but we're not going to write that. We're just going to leave it as 25 over 2. Okay, so when I'm doing this and I have something that is not an even number that I'm dividing by 2, I'm always just going to leave it as a fraction. So that means that this is 25 over 2 times the square root of 3 for the long leg. For the next one, I have 2 times radical 2, and I'm multiplying that by radical 3. So remember that we talked about when I am multiplying radicals. So if I multiply radical 2 times radical 3, that's going to give me 2 times radical 6. So the number outside stays the same. I'm multiplying the number on the inside by the square root of 3. For 2 times x, if x is 2 radical 2, and I'm doubling that, I'm only multiplying the number outside by 2. So that's going to become 4 times the square root of 2. Okay, so let's do this one without showing any work again. So if I have 5 times the square root of 5, I'm going to multiply the 5 inside by the square root of 3, so by 3. So that's going to give me 5 times the square root of 15 for a long leg. And then I'm multiplying the number outside by 2 back at the x to get the hypotenuse. So 2 times 5 is 10. This is going to be 10 times the square root of 5 for the hypotenuse. So if I think about that relationship, right, I multiplied by 2 to get the hypotenuse. That means I'm going to divide that number in front by 2 to get the value for x. So if I have 20 times the square root of 7 as my hypotenuse, that means 10 times the square root of 7 is the short leg. And then remember, we're multiplying the number inside the radical by 3 because we're multiplying by the square root of 3. So that's going to be 10 and then the square root of 21. So I have 10 radical 7, 10 radical 21, and 20 radical 7 for that special right triangle. In the last one, we have the x radical 3 given to us. So remember that if I was going from the short leg to the long leg, I multiplied the radical part by 3 to get that value. In this case, I'm going to divide by 3. So if I have 3 times radical 6 as something that I multiplied by radical 3 to get, that means that if I divide the number inside the radical by 3, that's going to give me 2 for the radical value. So 3 radical 2 is the short leg of that triangle. And then always to get the hypotenuse, I multiply the number outside by 2. So that's going to be 6 times the square root of 2 for the hypotenuse of that special right triangle. Okay, so last set, we've got the ones where something that originally had a radical will go away. So again, if I multiply the number inside here by a radical, so that's going to give me 10 times the square root of 9. The square root of 9 is 3. So that means that this is going to be 30. So 10 times the square root of 9 is really 10 times 3, which is 30. And then if I go back to find the hypotenuse, 10 radical 3 times 2 is going to give us 20 radical 3. So then for the next one, if I'm given the hypotenuse is 14 radical 3, and I divide the 14 by 2, that's going to give me 7 radical 3 as x. And then if I multiply that by radical 3, that's going to give me 7 radical 9. So 7 times 3 is 21. So that set is going to be 7 radical 3, 21, and 14 radical 3. Finally, for the last one, if I have 27 as my value, that means that if I think about this number, this relationship here, 10 times 3 gave us 30. 7 times 3 gave us 21. So what number times 3 gives us 27? That number is 9, right? 27 divided by 3 is 9. So that means that 9 times the square root of 3 is what x needs to be. And then finally, I'm going to multiply that by 2. So 9 times 2 is 18. So 18 times radical 3 is the hypotenuse for that triangle. So let's create tables for these triangles that don't have them. So remember, it's always a 3 by 3. So we're going to start this time with 30, 60, 90, and our pattern x root 3, and 2x. I'm just going to write these for each of them right now so that we have it ready to go. Solve. I've done this ahead of time. Okay, so let's look at what we've got. So we're given this side. This side is across from 30 degrees. So that means that x is the number radical 3. So if x is radical 3, and then I have to multiply radical 3 times radical 3, that's going to give me just the number 3. And then 2 times, if x is radical 3, means the hypotenuse of this is 2 radical 3. So then for the next one, we're given 12, which is across from 60. So that means that this number is 12. Remember that the relationship is, if I divide this number by 3, that gives me 4. So that means that x was 4 times the square root of 3. So if I double that, that gives me 8 times the square root of 3 for the 90-degree angle for the hypotenuse of the triangle. And then for our last one, we're given 4 radical 3, which is across from 90. So that's our 2x. So if double of x is 4 radical 3, if I take that half of that, that's going to give me 2 radical 3 for x. And then if I multiply that times the square root of 3, that's going to give me the number 6. So 2 radical 3 times radical 3 is 2 radical 9, which is 2 times 3 is how I get that 6 there. Okay, so that's a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. So remember that we learned both 30, 60, 90 and 45, 45, 90. And so you will need to be able to look at a triangle and know when to use which in order to solve problems involving these special right triangles.